Welcome back to Talking Shop. We are here today looking at Epiphany number 5. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 16 to 27. This is a long one. It's we get pretty long-winded today, but there's a lot to wade through here.
I don't know if it was because we had a little time off, or it was just because it's a big text. There's a lot there, and you don't want to preach it all, I don't think, but you could.
Yeah, you could. If you got 45 minutes to preach,
you better hand out coffee, because
you're going to be like Paul, people falling out of windows listening to you preaching.
That's right. Yeah, well, so we better get to it.
Yeah, like it, subscribe it, but let's get after it.
Did I'm alone in every way, yet I'm still welcome in the arms of the King.
Welcome back. We are in 1 Corinthians 9 this week. It's Epiphany 5, 16 through 27. Chapter 9, 16 through 27 of 1 Corinthians. It starts, if you look at your English translation, it starts a little abruptly because you've got another sentence in front of there. Verse 15, but I have made no use of any of these rights, nor am I writing these things to secure any supervision, for I would rather die than have anyone deprive me of my ground for boasting. What is he talking about? Because he's going to continue to talk about that, right? So what has he been talking about? Well, verse 14, right?
Yeah, he's talking about the fact that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living from the gospel.
Right.
So pay your pastor.
Yeah, pay your pastor. Exactly. Yeah, you should be able to get their living by proclamation of the gospel. This is
pretty sure this is quoted in the table of duties. What hearers owe their pastor.
Right. Exactly. So that, I mean, you have to have that piece, or you're not going to really understand what he's doing in 16 through 18. Mm-hmm. Right. 19 through 23 could almost stand by itself, and 24 through 27 could almost stand by itself as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot here. We're going to go through it, obviously, but I'm not sure I'd preach this whole thing. I think I'd take a chunk of it and go after it, whatever it might be. I tend to fall on the sports stuff at the end because that resonates the most with me, but you can kind of go anywhere with it. If your people need to pay you better, maybe you do need to go with 15, 16, 17, 18.
Sure.
Or if they're struggling with all of that. But yes, so verse 16, for if I preach the gospel, with all of that as background, if I preach the gospel, that gives me no ground for boasting. For necessity is laid upon me. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. So what's he doing? Preach it, brother.
Preach it, brother. Well, he's saying I never really took money for preaching the gospel. It's like you hear about at another place that he made tents to supplement his income. He was a bivocational guy, and people use Paul as an example often for pastors should be bivocational.
Oh, should be, right. Until they get to this text and they're like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah. They should at least pay for health insurance.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, and that's probably an argument for another time, right? But this idea it reminds me a whole lot of Peter when Jesus says, "Well, you guys still going to follow me?" And they're like, "Lord, to whom shall we go?" Mm-hmm. You know, what else am I going to do? Right? I'm going to preach the gospel. This is what I have. I try not to say it too much, but for folks, they'll come to me and go, great sermon or whatever. We start talking to that. We'll go, yeah. Except if you listen to any of them, I only got one stick. Mm-hmm. I've got one thing.
We are such a one-trick pony.
I'm kind of lame that way.
But it's a really good trick.
It's a good pony,
right? I mean that one trick is the resurrection of the dead.
Mm-hmm. Right. And woe to me if I don't talk about it.
Right.
Because that's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, it's like one of our friends says, what the hell are you going to do? Sit down and listen to somebody else preach?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is half the reason why most preachers only retire by being forced out, because it's like, I got to go sit in somebody else's church this week.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of awful preachers.
Thanks
for listening and not being an awful preacher.
Yeah, so this is why we're doing this, right, is to have these conversations so that we all might be better. I mean, I know this makes us better, and I hope it's helping you guys too, but the idea is we've got one pony that we ride on this deal,
right? And it's not for our own reward, right? It's not, hey, and I've been trying to explain this to some other people, right? It's not that we are trying to be better preachers so that we can grow our church and that we have a better ego. That we feel better about ourselves because I have a bigger church because I'm a good preacher, right? Like that is its own reward of you having a bigger ego, right? And I don't think that's the case that Paul's making here to the church in Corinth.
Yeah. Well, and the story we tell, the pony is not, I mean, it's an amazing thing, right? But Christ has died for you and forgives you of your sins, and he rose from the dead, and one day you will too. It's a great message. It's an amazing message. It's not a sexy message, though.
Well, it
depends
how much you come to terms with your mortality.
Yeah, no, there's that too. Yeah, exactly. But to a consumer culture, you have to break through that piece,
right,
to get to where that becomes, oh no, this is a big deal.
Right. People are, at least in my experience, people come to church with an expectation of religiously flavored entertainment. And that is not what we are offering.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. They're like,
yeah, it's not an episode of The Chosen, which I've been watching, by the way. You told me to.
Yeah.
So it's pretty good stuff.
It's decent, yeah.
Right. They're coming in expecting a hamburger, and we're a chicken store. Right? Like,
chicken nuggies.
Right? You come in expecting a hamburger.
It's a hell of a nuggie, but
right? Yes, both of these stores have both of these stores have drive-thrus, right? They're both fast food. But your expectation of a hamburger isn't going to be met at Chick-fil-A.
Right.
We just don't have what you're expecting.
Yeah,
we have something else that's really awesome and really amazing. We're just offering something different than what you're expecting.
Yeah. And it's maybe we got to change our wanter a little bit, right? Adjust our wanter. Verse 17, for if I do this of my own will, I have a reward. But if not of my own will, I am still entrusted with a stewardship.
Yeah, so I hear that, and it's like, whether or not I want to do this every week, I've been given this to do every week. Because don't lie to yourself. There are Sundays where you wake up and you're like, well, I got to get up and preach.
Yeah.
I have to instead of I get to.
Yeah.
For me, the preaching part is the easy part. It's the dealing with people that is.
Sure.
I have to go deal with people.
Yeah, because if you could be the celebrity preacher that walks out on stage and then walks back to the green room and then gets on your private jet and flies away, right? There's no, like, preaching's not that big of a deal. But you're right, dealing with the people is troublesome. But he's saying whether or not I have the internal motivation to actually do it this week, I still have good news to preach. At least that's what I hear.
Well, yeah, because it's a message outside of yourself. Doesn't matter how you feel about it.
Yeah.
Right, and taking this in context with verses 19 and 20 that are coming up. Right, the stewardship and this understanding of stewardship being, I'm not exactly a free man when it comes to this. Right, kind of Luther's on the freedom of a Christian. Right. So we are freed on the one hand, but we're freed so that we can be slaves to our neighbor. Right? Like we're freed from God so that we can go then and love and serve our neighbor. And so like the stewardship of I am bound under a king, I'm bound under a Lord to proclaim this gospel. Right, and given the accounts of Paul's preaching elsewhere, apparently he's a better writer than he is preacher, since people were falling asleep and falling out of windows.
Sure, yeah. But to your what you said about Luther, in case people don't know what that is, the freedom of a Christian. This is the line that you're referring to. A Christian man is the most free, Lord of all, and subject to none. A Christian man is the most dutiful servant of all, and subject to everyone.
Right. Which is exactly what Paul's going to say right here, right? And Martin Luther's just riffing off of Paul.
Yeah, he's not original.
When he does that. So let's keep going. We'll get to that. What then is my reward? That in my preaching I may present the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my right in the gospel. Right. So he's been doing this so that he doesn't feel beholding to anybody, quite frankly.
And in that he doesn't want to be a stumbling block.
Right.
Right? And so if people think, oh, I'm just here to collect a paycheck, right, then I'm not going to collect a paycheck. Kind of to go back to what he was talking about last week in chapter 8, right? If eating meat is going to cause you to stumble, then I'm not going to eat meat. If me collecting a paycheck and an income from this preaching is going to be a stumbling block, then I'm not going to collect a paycheck. Because I so care about the proclamation of the gospel that I don't want anything to get in the way of you hearing the good news.
Yeah. I wonder if we would have to do some research, and maybe you can do the research on your own out there, but if this has anything to do with those like those Stoic preachers who went around, they were at least allowed to carry a bag with them of stuff, like Jesus says go and don't bring anything with you. I wonder if it has anything to do with those guys would come to town, they would share their shtick, and then they'd pass the hat around, sort of thing. Or the like Luther talks about the itinerant preachers that keep coming into was it Wittenberg and causing all sorts of riffraff. But yes, he says riffraff.
Yeah, that's his word. Yeah, good. Yeah, so we've got this situation going on, especially what's unique with Paul, right, because of his unique position in the church and what he's doing as well. So, by the way, you're not Paul.
Yeah.
Right? None of us are.
Yeah.
His situation is going to be unique to him on the one hand. On the other hand, we are still all called to, in our own way, follow these principles as much as we can. 19, for though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. And again, that goes back to your Luther quote. To the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win Jews, verse 20, right? To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law, right? So this is all about...
It seems like a whole lot of sacrifice happening here.
It's a lot.
This Pharisee of Pharisees.
Yeah.
Being a Jew to Jews.
Right.
You're really putting yourself out there on these two, Paul.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, if he's in a mixed bag community, what then do you do? Are you a Jew to the Jews and a Gentile to the Gentiles, or where do you find your middle ground? That's a difficult.
And Pharisees, if I know my history well enough, which I may not, but Pharisees and like the standard Jew were pretty separated anyways, for the most part. And so like your Jewish whatever, farmer or shepherd or whatever, the Pharisees are kind of their own thing, and they in fact look down even on their own people in many ways, because their own people were somehow beneath them because they weren't following the law right. And Pharisees like, we got to do this. The Messiah won't come if we don't do this right. You know,
exactly.
Kind of thing. So I think maybe that for him that might have been part of what he was. I mean, I'm a scholastic, and I became like one who was a non-scholastic, a ditch digger and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think there's a place for that. Certainly there's a place for it in our institutions where we put such a high priority on education. We have to be careful that we're not always up here as well. I mean, you have to get there at times, but you've also got to be really basic. I mean, this is the whole, if you're not preaching the gospel every week, if you're not giving, at least in some way, that basic piece in there, you're doing your people a disservice.
Yeah. This is, in short, it's know your audience.
Yeah.
All right, know who you're preaching to, because a metaphor that works in one part of the country might not work in this part of the country, right? Like in St. Louis, if I'm preaching the Good Samaritan and I say a Cubs fan comes and cleans up the mess of this Cardinals guy, whatever, like that'll preach in St. Louis, but unless you've got a room full of St. Louisans or whatever, right? That metaphor doesn't carry.
It's like it's just baseball, right?
Yeah.
And no, not if you don't live in St. Louis.
Right.
Yeah, it's a whole nother animal. Yeah, no, that's right. And this is I think it's an important piece for pastors too, is to enculturate themselves in their area, whatever that looks like. I was really surprised how different the culture is in northwestern Arizona, even than Southern California. I had always kind of suspected it was about the same, and it's not. It's not at all. And so you really have to be willing to enculturate yourself in whatever that is, so that you can talk to them in ways that make sense. And of course, preaching here is very different than if you're preaching in a university chapel. You know, then you have to do different moves. You got to do different things. Yeah, very good. 21, to those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. We had actually talked about this earlier today, this idea.
I was thinking that too.
Yeah, of how we are free of the law. The New Testament is very clear about that, and yet the law is still something that we hold up as, you know, this is what it looks like to live under God. And you can never get away from those principles. Natural law stuff. Right?
Yeah, it's still good and right and true.
Right. Yeah.
That scene from the old Luther movie, the student is questioning Luther, like, so you're saying that we are free and we can do whatever we want?
Yeah.
And Luther's response is yes. And so as a baptized, redeemed, forgiven child of God, what do you now want?
Right. As you live in your identity, which Kolb hacks that line, you know, as well.
Right.
You know, yeah, you can do whatever, but what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And why do you want to do that as a redeemed child of God? It changes everything. Yep. Yeah.
God doesn't need your good works, but your neighbor does.
Right.
Right? Like you don't go love and serve your neighbor in order to earn anything before God. Right? All of that is entirely taken care of. You go and love and serve your neighbor because your neighbor needs your love, care, and concern. Right?
Right. Every day. Yeah, exactly. 22. So he kind of continues this to the weak. I became weak that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save a few. Which is probably a good realistic goal for pastors. It's easy, especially when you've been in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, and 20 years, to get a little jaded in this job, because you see people that you've been talking to for a decade and they're still doing the same garbage. Yeah. And it's like, we've talked about this, you know, we've talked about this. And the idea is you don't have to die on the cross because Jesus did it for you. Just do your job. And keep going. Yeah. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, right, for Jesus, that I may share with them in its blessings. And it's not going to be everybody, but it's this idea of, why do you continue to get up? Why do you continue to write? Why do you continue to work on your craft of preaching, as it is, right? Why do you continue to go to the meetings? Why do you continue to do all this stuff? It's so that I might be able to share in the blessings and win a few.
Because this is the best news ever.
Right.
This is like the greatest story ever told.
Because it changes everything.
Yeah, 19 and 23, just the way my paragraph on my Logos Bible software lays it out, those almost bookend each other, right? Though I'm free of all, I've made myself to be a servant of all, that I might win more of them. And then jump to 23. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings.
Which I think is really an interesting message. I mean, if you're preaching this part of the text to your congregation, it allows them to, if they've got, adult children that are living like animals, or whatever it is, it allows them a little bit of space to feel some of the forgiveness, and you gotta kind of assume. I mean, every parent messes up their kid somehow. I mean, it's just that's the nature of being a parent. Nobody does it perfectly, but it gives them some freedom to go. Yeah, they're making their own choices too.
Yeah,
and yeah, we tried. We did the best we can. Yeah, they probably needed about a year's worth of therapy because of the stupid things I did, but.
Only a year?
Right.
You did a good job.
but even beyond that, at some point they're making their own choices, and you hope that they continue to follow Christ, but they have that weird free will thing too, so it allows some space for that too. Then I might save some. So you got that piece. Verse 24, which I think is a whole section in and of itself. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. So what's he doing? Right, because that sounds a little fatalistic, right? Well, we've got a whole race full of people, only one get to go to heaven, right? which is not what he's doing at all, is it?
Right.
What he's doing is talking about this focus, right? The focus to receive the prize, to be the one that receives the prize.
Well, when we weren't recording, I brought up Michael Phelps, and Paul does have these ancient Olympics sort of in mind when he's talking about this. And
they were no stranger to games and stuff, though, right? They had the hippodromes and everything else. I mean, so the games, not even just the Olympics, but
sure.
Competitions in general were everywhere. But
so they do it to obtain or to receive a perishable wreath. Right, they would get that crown thing or that diadem on their head, and there's an article about Michael Phelps and how he, obviously, he's the most decorated Olympian of all time, and it wasn't good enough for him to the point that he devolved into, drinking himself almost to death kind of thing, getting DUIs and saying how he became utterly depressed. And how many did he win? 22, 24, something like that, gold medals.
Chest full.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that on the Sports Illustrated cover, right?
Yeah, to the point where he can barely hold his head up if he wears them all around his neck. But that's kind of the image here is he's won all of these awards and it still doesn't mean a damn thing.
Yeah. Right.
Where do you find your worth and your value and your identity?
Right, because if that's your identity, you're going to have to keep winning.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And nobody can continue to keep winning.
Well, I mean, you could even, I don't know that I would actually do this in a sermon, but just as a point of conversation, right? This is even the Bruce Jenner, Caitlyn Jenner thing. World-class runner. His identity was in how good of an athlete he was, and then his identity was being married to whatever her crazy face name is, and now he's a woman.
Right. New identity.
New identity. So it's all identity stuff, and that's why that Kolb book. What's the book called? On the spirituality of the cross. Is that the one?
That's Gene Veith.
That's Gene Veith. Sorry, folks. Should have gotten my bibliography out.
You should have.
But anyways, right? It's all identity and purpose.
Yeah.
Right.
Christianity solves all those basic questions of life.
Right. Yeah. So verse 25, right? It kind of continues this athlete theme. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we do an imperishable. So now he's making this idea of training. What is the deal with discipleship, quite frankly? Why do we train at this stuff? Why do we continue to study? Why do we continue to exercise self-control in the Christian life? Why do we continue to follow the Ten Commandments, all those other things? So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as when beating the air. You could probably put in there, so I do not preach aimlessly. Right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, so I do not speak like somebody just swinging at the wind.
Mm-hmm.
But I discipline my body, keep it under control, lest, after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. Which is an interesting thing. You're like, well, this is Paul, right? But even Paul goes, I don't want to get disqualified from all of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there is an element of disqualification potential in there somehow, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there just is.
Yeah.
So what else do you do with it?
I think I see a whole lot, kind of those identity and purpose themes in here, in that I think you can pull a whole lot of law and gospel out of those,
Mm-hmm.
and that people do worship all sorts of idols and find their identities in all sorts of other things, and that their Christian identity is only something that they put on Sunday morning from 9 to noon,
Mm-hmm.
and when there's a funeral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it's
Maybe
akin
Wednesday nights
to,
at Bible study,
I
but-
mean, it's akin to kind of that's the coat that I wear at times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that who they are is something else.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul is saying, hey, no, you have a deeper identity here.
Yeah.
Like, all of those other things are perishable,
Mm-hmm.
but this crown of eternal life is imperishable, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so kind of preaching that you have something bigger and deeper
Mm-hmm.
that is going to transcend time,
Yeah.
that is imperishable. And
you're
you're missing this thing. You're boxing in the air
Mm-hmm.
and all of these other things that you find your identity in.
Yeah.
But this one trick pony that we are, the resurrection from the dead,
That's right.
is where it's all at. And
Yeah.
this is really important.
Yeah, it's so funny whenever I think of this, what you're talking about, or even these wreaths that they wear. For some reason, it's always reminded me of when you're doing a baptism, you make the sign of the cross on their forehead.
Mm-hmm. And on their heart.
Yeah, and on their heart, of course. But yeah, both. But we do that, and we say, to mark you as one redeemed by Christ the crucified.
Mm-hmm.
That's the winner's wreath.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean? The sign of the cross on your forehead.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the thing in Revelation. They were all marked on their forehead.
Right.
Right.
Right. This is the goal. This is the prize that you've already been given. Now run your race.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that kind of thing. And so it's really I don't know why that's always kind of been the way I envision it, but probably because I'm a 50-year Lutheran. But you know, it's this already been given prize. Now live like it.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, that's a good way to preach it if you want, I suppose.
It is.
Right.
It is.
It's the prize you already have. Now go live it out. Good. 1 Corinthians 9. This is a big section of Scripture. There's a lot here. Well, this took us almost 30 minutes to get through. You've got 3 different sections. You don't probably want to even preach that long. But grab a chunk of it and go for it. And, hey, give him Jesus. Give him Christ crucified and risen. For them, and it's all there. It's here in this, and it's your identity. It's the striving towards being who you are. Like it, subscribe, and help other people to find it by liking and subscribing in the algorithm. And until then, God bless your preaching.